on, my friends? I'm Rick, and we're looking at yet another weekend in November here in Iowa, right? So, we just got the results from the off-year elections. Mostly, it was a couple of governorships were up, and mostly local town and community stuff that was on the election ballot. So we've seen a couple turnovers. Mostly it seems to have gone in the Democrats' favor, which is a positive sign in my opinion. One of the biggest things that for me personally, I think that watching yet another state, here in this case the state of Ohio, legalizing recreational marijuana for its citizen is probably one of the most progressive steps I have seen our country take in my entire lifetime. I grew up in the drug culture. It was around me everywhere. I seen my relatives, my peers, strangers, all. I've sat for hours in dope houses waiting for my shit to come. I was a pothead for better part of 20 years. Right out of high school, I went through my first piss poor marriage, and it really messed with my head, and I had some other issues going on, plus just being stupid and young. I also got turned down by the Navy because I was a little too fat, and which really pissed me off. And then within a few weeks of that, I was introduced to my first bong hit, and after that, I became a advocate of it for ever since. Now, there about in 2002, circumstances insisted on me cleaning that up, and so that's a different chapter of my life. But having grown up, I've seen the impact it can have on a lot of people, and in part, here's the thing. The government has used this to villainize and to scare the public for decades in many different forms. They've used it so many times that it's actually become cliche, and in some cases counterproductive to their initial intention. The very beginning rules for this stuff, if you look at the history for hemp, for example, hemp was quite prevalent in the original 13 colonies. It was a very highly demanded product, especially with considering how many hundreds of miles of rope went into the average sailing ship of its era. Hemp was a very huge lucrative product, and because of competition for a couple other, I think cotton, the fiber, saw this push. Their version of lobbyists back in the day pushed their elected officials or bribed them under the counter to basically ban hemp and make it an outlaw, which later became an outlaw or illegal because of a drug reference. But they'd already been pushing to penalize people for raising hemp back in the early 1800s, late 1700s, and in this philosophy is just carried through. And then enter the 80s, and you've got the late 70s, early 80s, and the Republican Party is not doing so hot. It's having some problems, and suddenly this big dog whistle gets popped up. We got to do something, the counterculture, the 60s, blah, blah. It's all got to do with the drugs. So we got to outlaw the drugs. And so what do? We get a different version of prohibition, and we all know how prohibition ended. It didn't end with a big, it ended in a whimper. I mean, at the end of the day, it was just a decade, an enforced a dry decade or so that it really saw the upswing in a whole lot of illegal activity in the country, and organized crime really cemented organized crime's position of power. And whose fault is that? Well, the people who's wanted to limit this access to this material from a commercial perspective. And then, of course, by this time, we got the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry spent a lot of money on villainizing marijuana and marijuana products, hemp products. It's kind of one of those sidebar things you got to dig a little deeper to find at, but it's the way it worked. And so we want to create this another prohibition. Then there was a time in America's history when most of the drugs were not illegal, but there was reasons and good reasons to make them illegal. And there's a lot of hardcore drugs that truly serve no purpose other than to wreck your life. Marijuana is not one of those. I have made the argument, I have watched the comparison my entire life, and alcohol is 10 times more destructive than marijuana ever will be. You don't see stoners doing 900 mile an hour down the interstate, screaming at the top of their lungs and cackling like a maniac. You will see alcoholics do that. I have ridden with alcoholics who've done this. Flatlined their car to see just how fast it can go in the middle of the night because we're just shit-faced to no end. Yeah, I'm just saying. So no, and the fact that we now have better than over half the states in the country, that tells me it's inevitable. It's just inevitable that the lion's share of the states will get there. And I don't know if we need to we need 75% of the states to be on board before the feds decide to step up. I mean, Biden's made some big steps. They're decriminalizing it. They're taking it out of the status one, tier one drug category, which is a huge thing. But he hasn't rescinded it as a law. He hasn't reduced the penalties. And in truth, he could direct his various legal agencies to disregard any kind of any kind of stuff that involves this kind of stuff. Well, if still illegal, so be it, but it's not something, we have much more important things to prioritize our money on, especially since we have part of Congress trying to defund most of these agencies anyway. Let's focus on the really, really big threats for a change. Wouldn't that be a nice thing? Not going to happen, but it would be a nice damn thing. So you go back to Nixon's era, and Nixon's the one that started this quote war on drugs. It's Reagan and Nancy Reagan that really got it into the full-blown vernacular of the country, but it started as early as Nixon's era, and it was a political gambit. And a straw man in some ways to direct to try to get their base angered and riled up, and to give them a direction that makes the party seem progressive and looking out for the common interests of the average American. Which, if you truly look at all the stuff that the Republican Party has done over the past 40 years, most of it does nothing for you or I. At the end of the day, they keep going on about these fat-ass tax cuts. What tax cuts? What tax cuts do they keep talking about? They talk about a lot of tax cuts, but who gets them? When was the last time you had an actual tax cut? It's been a while since I've had a tax cut. One that matters? You're going to tax, we're going to take $6 a week out of my check less? Ooh, how am I going to notice? You want to take $60 out of my check? With $60 less out of my check every week? That'd make an impact. Yeah, they're talking $240 a month. Yeah, shit. But no, that's not going to happen, because they need us to pay for the damn bills for the government. If it wasn't for us paying our taxes, then the rich cats would have to pay their share, and they still should pay far more than they pay. And they have goddamn too many loopholes that allows them to get around not paying the ones that stuff they got to pay now. So you talk about the pros and cons of marijuana in a nutshell, and some of the caveats that go with this they don't talk about. So obviously, making more drugs legal opens the window for more people to experiment with them. And the problem with drugs, it's no different than alcohol. Alcohol leads people to do things that they would not normally do under a normal circumstances. So without being under the influence of alcohol, they won't do the things that they end up doing while shit-faced. If you drink, you've been to a party, you've seen it. You know people, your friends have, you yourself have experienced it probably, and you know people who have. So it's the truth. You will do things that you would not normally do sober, drunk. And they can be detrimental things to both your well-being, to other people's well-being. Many people end up going to prison because of doing stupid stuff while intoxicated. So the same principle goes, people becoming intoxicated on another substance. So in the case of marijuana and alcohol being, quote, gateway drugs, it leads some people to want to experiment with yet other stuff. Well, this was a good thing. This experience was pleasant, and it wasn't a bad deal. So what would this other thing be like, kind of thing? Or you get exposed to new peers who are more open-minded when it comes to, imbibing whatever it is they want to do. And not that I like to go around quoting Joe Rogan and all that much. I like a lot of his stuff, but there's some of his videos that just cheesed me off. Anyway, his belief, a lot of the stuff he is a proponent for, is a supporter of, are organic. So when we're talking shrooms, we're talking marijuana, we're talking hash or stuff like this. We're talking stuff that's an organic base. Many make arguments that cocaine is an organic based item. It's after it gets chemically altered that it becomes something that it's not. But at the end of the day, these things are not going to be overly detrimental to you in moderation, which is true. It's like alcohol. Alcohol in moderation is fine. There are entire cultures who drink alcohol on a daily basis as their beverage of choice. And they're not a nation of alcoholic people with failing kidneys and livers. So, it's a matter of a lot of factors, including how often and how much, and, other circumstances that go with it. So, and that said, then there's the prison side of things. So probably 40%. I used to know the actual numbers, but I think the current numbers are running about 40% of the inmate population of the United States is in there for drug-related, mostly non-violent offense drug charges. So people are getting massive, small amounts of marijuana can get you 25 years in prison. And if you get stuck in a Fed pen, you're doing most of that 25 damn years. So you could have a very small amount in your possession and get yourself in deuce trouble. And now that they're reducing those penalties and things like that, that's changed. But that is the truth. And so better part of 40% of the population of our prisons. So we got almost 3 million people incarcerated in America today. That means better part of 1.6 million of them, 1.5 or 1.45 or something like that million out of the 3 million people are in there for non-violent drug related charges. So you could eliminate 80% of those just by decriminalizing the punky little stuff, those small personal possession charges. We get rid of that altogether, and that changes a huge thing. This reduces the sheer size of the prison population considerably, which means you save a lot of money, right? It means you can shutter and shut down a bunch of these prisons that you don't no longer need, and you can shrink down the budgets for them, right? Isn't that what we want? Isn't that the Republicans' goal, is to shrink the government spending? Well, there's a great way of doing it. So the positive sides of this is we legalize it, and then the population, or it becomes yet another taxable product, and a considerably popular product that would get the government gets a kickback like they do everything else that we purchase. So if you look at Colorado's been legalized for a number of years now, and from every report I've read coming out of there, they've cut their prison budget by almost a third. And their population's been considerably diminished. They do not incarcerate people anymore for minor marijuana possession charges. They still punish them. There's still fines. There's some other stuff to go with some of it on the federal level, and mostly from the state level, they just don't pursue it anymore. And that saved them 20 million a year or something like that. It was quite a bit. And then for their prison budget, then there's the tax revenue side of it, and I think they were on par. The first full year, they were on par to make $50 million in tax revenue from the new burgeoning industry that was cropping up. And these other states that have jumped on since, they all are seeing the same thing. They're all getting advantages to it. So there's huge advantages to it. Then there's the, look, we're all going to do this eventually crap. which states, like prohibition, there was always the last states to get on board because they're the most conservative or whatever. And I always find that as a cop out, because what is that? When it comes to alcohol, more alcoholics are conservatives than there are independents that are conservatives, at least in my observations. I can't prove any of that, but that's kind of how I look at it, right? So at the end of the day, this has always been a fool's mission, and we've, as a country, I don't know how many trillions of dollars we have wasted on this insanity. And you want to reduce the impact of the drug cartels in South America and Mexico, you legalize most of the shit. At this point, they now don't have a customer base. Nobody's going to go buy their shit from somebody under the counter or on the corner that they don't know with questionable stuff that they're peddling you, when they can go to a shop and buy it from a vendor who's proficient in what they're selling and knows what they're selling. And you're getting a better quality product. You're getting your money's worth, etc., etc. So you put most of this same thing took toll when the prohibition came to an end. A whole bunch of formerly illegal entities suddenly found themselves needing to find new jobs. They had to reinvent themselves. So there was whole industries built around supporting prohibition. And once prohibition ends, there's no need for those supporting organizations. Not to mention all the lost revenue. So a lot of hard liquor and stuff came by way of Canada, and so there was a bunch of production up there that then finally didn't have as big a market for it, because then once the prohibition ends, they now have to compete legally with all the other makers of fine spirits in the country that were now dragging their heads out from under the holes they've been hiding since during the prohibition years. So the fact is, marijuana, the drugs, war on drugs has failed badly, and they need to just officially declare it over with and end with a modern version of prohibition, and direct a small percentage. If you look at how much money tax-wise that can be generated, there's no reason that a significant portion of the tax revenue coming from the sale of marijuana in your various states can't be directed towards healthcare issues and mental health issues, and to improve the rehabilitation programs and stuff to help keep people out of prison, or to keep people, once they get out of prison, to help them succeed and not reoffend. Just my opinion, because you're going to find a whole bracket of drug dealers elements in the country suddenly out without jobs, because there's no market for people to buy their illicit dope, when they can once again just order it online or go to the local dispensary and get what they want and pay cash for it. It's just my opinion on it. We shall see how this proceeds. I honestly didn't expect to even see this much in my lifetime. The fact we have this many, 26 damn states, wow, I'm impressed. I just wish it was frickin' Iowa, for God's sake. I really do. And like I said, I've been a huge advocate my whole life. I would rather see them. I know it's a hypocrite. It's being a hypocrite. It's a hypocritical, or however you want to pronounce it. It's being a hypocrite. But I would rather see them make alcohol illegal and marijuana legal, because you're far less likely to do a whole lot of the dumbass shit you do while you're drunk. I'm not saying you don't do a bunch of dumbass shit when you're stoned, because I've seen plenty of that too. But it's usually much less of a problem for other people than the alcohol the driven fueled version is, in my opinion. Anyway, until next time, I'm Rick, and that's Missy over there, and the rest of the gang out there somewhere in the other room. You guys have yourself a great weekend, and we're coming up on Thanksgiving and stuff. Be another couple weekends, right? Who knows what we're going to do for then, right? Till next time.